All right. Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to the April 6th, 2020 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We are going to begin, although we're not meeting together, with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I would ask if you could all find a flag maybe in your own houses, and let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'm going to go ahead and lead the Pledge of Allegiance if I can. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
And to the republic
for which it
which it stands, one nation,
under God, with liberty
Liberty, justice for all.
for all.
They want it the other either.
All right. Thank you all. Madam Clerk, will you please call roll?
Yes, sir. Ms. Conley?
here,
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
here,
Mr. Lickenhouse?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mr. Z?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
All right. Thank you all, and welcome to Falls Church's first virtual City Council meeting. This meeting is being conducted
Mayor, we're having some audio problems.
safety of the public and staff, and to comply with the governor's executive orders restricting public gatherings.
Mayor, this is Cindy. I hate to interrupt, but we're having audio problems and we're only getting every other word.
We're living in an extraordinary
oh my gosh, what are you getting?
times that are testing
Mayor, this is
each and every
Cindy.
one of us. So we're helping. Okay. Yes.
Mayor, sorry to interrupt you. We're having your audio feed drop in and out like we had earlier. I wonder if you're using the same mic as earlier today.
Yeah. Although the problem wasn't, I don't think, with it dropping. I think there was just a slight echo. So yeah, I'm still using the same internal mic on my computer, but I don't think it's ever been dropping.
All right, we have an alert, but now you're clear. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to start your message over because I think we mostly missed it.
All right. Well, that's fine. Let me go ahead and I'll start back from where I'd started a second ago, which is just to welcome as we kick off this broadcasted meeting. It is our sincere hope that you and your family are safe and healthy.
He's feeding back.
We are living in extraordinary times that are testing each and every one of us every single day. We all understand the dangers we are facing, but I would like to pause for a moment to point out something just as important. Every day in Falls Church, we see small acts of generosity, neighbors helping neighbors, friends assisting friends, and strangers coming together to the rescue of other strangers. We see shuttered businesses making masks for our healthcare providers and local restaurants providing food to first responders. Everywhere around the city we look, we find inspiration. And we need to look no farther than our own city manager to find it. Since this crisis began, White Shields has been working tirelessly on behalf of our community. He has done this despite the fact his own mother, Dorothy, contracted the coronavirus early on and passed away last week. It takes a special kind of person to fight through his own grief for the benefit of his fellow citizens. But he is just one of the many here in Falls Church. I would also like to recognize and send our heartfelt thanks to the doctors, nurses, police, EMS, and other first responders who are putting their lives on the line day in and day out for the rest of us. I also commend our residents who are helping to end this scourge in their own right. simply by complying with the directives and advice of our health experts. This pandemic can only be defeated by citizens who care enough to voluntarily do the right thing and lay low at home. If I may, I would ask for that we observe a moment of silence for all the victims of this virus and all those who are fighting it in Falls Church and everywhere. Although many of us are homebound, it does not mean that your city council and government are not working relentlessly to make sure you are safe and that the city continues to operate effectively. Essential city services such as police, fire, EMS, and trash are all fully functioning. We are advocating for the interests of our residents, businesses, and the city itself at the state and federal level to ensure appropriate relief and assistance are available. We are working with our regional neighbors to confirm that we are following best practices, coordinating our efforts and communication, and sharing real-time information. We are examining our budget to make accurate predictions of the fiscal impact of this emergency and make whatever course corrections are necessary to assure the financial health of this community. And although City Hall is closed, staff continues to work remotely to ensure the wheels of government keep turning. I would also like to explain some of the mechanics of this and subsequent virtual meetings. Although our format has changed, we intend to continue to conduct city business in an open and transparent manner. We will continue to observe the letter and spirit of the Freedom of Information Act and open meeting requirements as instructed by our city attorney. The purpose of this meeting is to consider and act upon emergency ordinances to ensure the continuity of the Falls Church city government. Connected with this and later virtual meetings, we will post public notices of all meetings at least 3 days in advance with the agenda, instructions on how the public can view and participate in the meetings. Hear public comment on matters before council. However, due to the nature of our electronic meetings, public comment will need to be provided in written form through email. That address is cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov. Public comment will be provided to the city council and limited electronic meetings. As a general rule, this means only matters related to the emergency and related to continuity of city operations can be discussed or considered. This does not mean our city budget, however, and other matters where delay may cause irrevocable harm to the city, its residents, employees, businesses, infrastructure, or property. Are excluded. These emergency procedures are in effect for 60 days. They may be extended by the City Council for up to 6 months. The procedures we are putting in place are similar to those being enacted throughout the state and are consistent with guidelines and guidance provided by the Attorney General. Tonight, we will discuss and consider formal action on our efforts to keep our local businesses to help them weather the storm. Finally, I'd like to thank my colleagues on council, city staff, residents, and the business community for how we've responded to this emergency. We are following the recommendations of our health professionals by staying at home and greatly limiting our business activities. The many of the recommendations experiences the worst health impacts from the pandemic, and it will be likely a long recovery period for our economy. However, the actions we've taken, as hard as they are slowing the spread of coronavirus and saving lives. Keep faith that better days are ahead of us and that our community will be stronger and more resilient than ever. With that, I'll ask the city clerk call the first items. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I will provide a copy of the mayor's remarks when we re-upload the video, since there were a few glitches, so everybody can see the full text. Our first item is TR 20-12, resolution consenting to updated declaration of local emergency and disaster due to novel coronavirus COVID-19. And I wanted to ask the city attorney if she wanted me to call all the items together or go one by one.
I think that we can do this one first alone. The next two should be called together.
Okay, and I do have one public comment on the next two, so I will call that then. But this is TR 20-12.
All right, as our city attorney, Ms. McCroskey, are you going to do the staff report?
I can do it. Wyatt, speak up if you would prefer to. This is an update to the emergency declaration that was adopted on, I think it was March 16th. And the reason to update it is to include the recognition that this is an emergency and is also a disaster within the meaning of the Virginia Code. That it defines disaster to include a communicable disease that presents a public health threat. The reason this can be beneficial is that in the event of a disaster, the city can adopt a continuity of government ordinance, which changes some of the state law requirements and local law requirements and enables the city to move a little bit more nimbly and have virtual meetings to provide for the continuity of government. And that will be the next ordinances we will consider. So this is really a very simple change to reflect that this is not just an emergency, but is a disaster, and it just is you consenting to an updated declaration of emergency by the Director of Emergency Management, the city manager.
Ms. McCroskey, there is a revised version of this that's just been updated this afternoon. Is that correct?
Not this one. I believe.
Okay.
I believe this matter. This resolution remains the same as what was posted initially. The ordinance, we're making a little change to it, and I'll go through that when we get to the next two items. But for this one, as I said, it's a very simple update to the declaration of emergency to provide that it is an emergency and a disaster within the meaning of the code.
All right, does anyone on council have any questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, Dave Snyder, I don't really have any comments. I think that we're in extraordinary circumstances. We'll do our best to maintain public input, but we need to recognize that these are very unusual circumstances and that there are certain things that we need to do in order to preserve the public health and welfare. So I'll move approval of TR 20-12.
Second.
Second?
Second.
Is that Mr. Lichtenhouse, though, who made the second?
that is
Mr. Lichtenhouse, yes.
Thank you.
Great. Madam Clerk, we don't have any public comment then at this time on this particular first item. Is that correct?
We don't.
All right. Is any other discussion that council wants to make? If not, Madam Clerk, will you call the roll vote on this?
Yes. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Z?
Yes.
And Mayor Charter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, council.
All right, let's move on to the next item. Will you call the next item, please?
Yes, as the city attorney recommended, I will call them together. TO 20-12 and TO 20-13, identical names, except the first one is an emergency ordinance to ensure the continuity of the Falls Church city government, implementing emergency procedures, modifying public meeting requirements and public practices and procedures in order to address continuity of operations associated with the COVID-19 pandemic disaster. The second one, TO 20-13, is the regular adoption of the same item.
All right, Ms. McCroskey.
Yeah, these are two ordinances that are essentially the same. They are the same in substance. 20-12 is an emergency ordinance that would be in effect for 60 days when adopted by council. It's being adopted without the usual advertising and first and second reading. It's only effective for 60 days unless within that time period, the council readopts it using the standard procedures with a first reading, advertisement and second reading. And so that's the ordinance 20-13 is giving the regular first reading to the same ordinance. This ordinance, council's meeting tonight under the authority to have a virtual meeting when the governor has declared a state of emergency. In addition, the city has authority under the Virginia Code to adopt procedures for electronic meetings in situations where when there's been a disaster and they need to provide for continuity of government. So this ordinance is based on a model ordinance that's being adopted by many jurisdictions within the state. It was initially developed by a committee of the local government attorneys of Virginia. And most jurisdictions either have or plan to adopt this ordinance. It sets forth standards for local government entities to conduct electronic meetings due to COVID-19 and the public health threat that exists. In particular, paragraph 2 of the ordinance addresses the electronic meetings and includes specific procedures, including requiring notices and agendas to identify the meetings as electronic and as emergency meetings, and to provide information as to how the public can participate. It does so for all meetings, and it also has some specific requirements for public hearings, providing that the city will notify people as to how they can participate in writing and through electronic means and comment on items that come before council. It suspends some deadlines so that the inability to have in-person meetings where all business can be done will not result in problems with a lack of council action or lack of other entities' actions. It is not something that's going to allow all standard matters to come before council, but only those that are required for the emergency and for continuity of government. Now, the ordinance as posted granted the city's Director of Emergency Management a number of powers to waive or reduce fees, penalties, and interest under city ordinances, to waive enforcement of various city ordinances, and to eliminate complicated processes and procedures during the emergency. There's been some question about or concern about the breadth of that ordinance, and in order to address that and be more specific about the authority that council is giving to the Director of Emergency Management, it's recommended tonight that we adopt these two ordinances without the paragraph that gives the Director of Emergency Management broad powers, and we will develop more specific items or a more specific ordinance that will call out the specific powers that the city manager feels he will need, and we will bring that back to you at a subsequent meeting. So I have sent out late this afternoon, revised motions for each of these, which strike the language in that paragraph and do so by line number. If there are any questions, I'm happy to address them.
All right, thank you very much. I guess I would just want clarification for everyone's benefit. So the first motion is essentially good for 60 days. The second motion would be good for 6 months. And the second motion, we're going to do a first reading like we normally would do,
Right.
which will allow us to go out six months. Whereas the first is an emergency action, which will only give us 60 days. Is that right?
That's correct. Under the charter, paragraph 411, an emergency ordinance can be adopted without standard notice. That's what you're doing with ordinance 2012, but it's only in effect for 60 days unless within that time, council readopts the same ordinance using the regular procedures and advertising. So what we are doing tonight is adopting the ordinance for continuity of government to be effective immediately. And we are beginning the process to readopt it through the usual procedures so that it can go beyond the 60 days. And then a continuity of government ordinance can last until 6 months after the disaster.
All right, thank you. Do other folks have questions or comments?
I do, Mayor. This is Dan Z. In as much as this authorization that we're considering would go for 180 days, 6 months after the disaster. So my question revolves around the definition of disaster. Is it, I assume it's our local declaration of disaster and our lifting of the same. It begs the natural question of how is that linked to either regional, statewide, or national, statewide lifting of the declaration.
I think the continuity of government authority goes to the local declaration of disaster and would last until 6 months after the end of the disaster here being the communicable disease that creates a public health threat. So I don't think it would be restricted should the governor lift his declaration of emergency. I think this one is tied to your declaration of emergency, which could very well end about the same time, I would think. But I think it is tied to your declaration, the one that you have updated tonight.
Thank you very much for the clarification.
Are there any other questions or comments? We do have a public comment, which the clerk will get to in just a moment. But are there any other council comments or questions? Do we have a motion then?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, before you do that, I just want to note that on the revised motions I sent out, it had lines 89 through 99. They should be 189 through 199, just to clarify.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder, did you have a comment or question?
I heard someone else wanted to move. I wanted to move the revised ordinance 2012 and 2013, and I know there's an opportunity for public comment.
Okay. Do we have a second on each of those motions?
Does the language of the motion need to stipulate the lines that are not included?
I can just state them. I think what Mr. Snyder had wanted to do was include that for ordinance number 2012, lines 189 through 199 are deleted. For ordinance 2013, lines 194 through 204 are deleted.
Thank you.
Can we also add the language for the second reading date and publication as well?
All right. Did we have a second?
I second it, Mayor.
On both motions?
Both motions.
Okay, is that Mr. Z?
It is Mr. Z.
Okay, so Mr. Z has seconded both motions. Before we get to a vote, Madam Clerk, will you read the comment that was received?
I think we also, before we do the comment, we are setting the second reading and public hearing for, what was the date on that?
Before May 31st, 2020, and authorizing me to publish that advertisement in the newspaper.
All right, is that included in the motion, Mr. Snyder, and the second, Mr. Z?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
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 Will you read the comment then?
Yes, and I'm just checking comments. We received no live comments. Earlier, I believe you guys everybody received this from Keith Thurston of 1015 Birch Street. He said he does fully support the emergency continuity ordinance. And he wishes to make sure that the agenda published would contain the email address for other mechanisms for input on agenda items prior to the meeting. Also the agenda has the mechanisms published on it for participating electronically during the meeting, and those are part of our policies, and we did relay that to him. He also did have some technical questions for the city attorney, and I believe that they spoke, but he was in favor of adopting these.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. The clerk has read the public comment. Unless there's any additional comment from council, why don't we move to a vote then on each separate item?
Okay, I'm going to do TO 20-12, which is the emergency ordinance first. And I'll start with Ms. Conley.
Yes.
Mr. Duncan.
Yes.
Ms. Hardy.
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse.
Yes.
Mr. Snyder.
Yes.
Mr. Z.
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
And the motion carries 7-0. And then we'll go to TO 20-13. Ms. Conley.
Yes.
Mr. Duncan.
Yes.
Ms. Hardy.
Yes.
Mr. Lickenhouse.
Yes.
Mr. Snyder.
Yes.
Mr. Z.
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, council.
Thank you very much. Our next item is going to be a report from the city manager and also the assistant city manager detailing some of the recent efforts to fight this pandemic from the city. And so I'll turn it over to Mr. Shields and Ms. Messner and thank them both for all the fine work they've done and city staff as a whole during this difficult time. Mr. Shields, Ms. Messner.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. What I would like to do is to provide a report on the status of city operations. And Cindy Messner will join me with a report on some of the things that she has been acting city manager for a portion of this crisis. And I'd like her to add her report, and she will also focus on some of the work we're doing with our state and federal counterparts and with our regional partners. That report will be followed by a report from Kiran Bawa, who will give a financial report in light of the shutdown of the economy, essentially, and what that means for the city's finances. And Becky Witzman and Sally Cole will join in a report on things we're trying to do to support our local business community as we get through this crisis. And I would suggest to council that we get through each of these reports because they are, in fact, really all one report on the status of major operations in the city today, and then have a period of questions and discussion after these three reports. And so I will start with
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Manager. I just wanted to make sure the mayor wanted to save the rest of the public comment for after your report, if that's okay.
Well, let me ask you, Ms. Keith, how many comments do we have?
We probably have a dozen comments.
Okay.
And they're since your last meeting, so I just wanted to make sure how you wanted to proceed.
All right, well, I'll tell you, why don't we just go ahead and hear those, if that's okay, Mr. Shields, since you haven't begun the body of your presentation. Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
Thank
All right.
you.
Dean,
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, and so these are comments that started after the last meeting you had, so some of them have been addressed, but I will share them. Mr. Alec Jazar sent a comment. He was concerned about the homeless during the COVID-19 virus and just presented an article that you could read about homeless and evictions, and he suggested that evictions should be banned. Jeff Sonderman of 604 Fulton Drive asked you to consider how to protect and help small businesses during the event. Kate Nessen, an employee of the Treasurer's Office, wrote to say that she believed that city employees should be allowed to work from home. Mr. Sean Dakin wrote several times to ask that the farmers market be closed, as did his wife, Selena Dakin. Katie Wiles also asked that the farmers market be discontinued. And then Selena Dakin did write again after the new protocols, as did Sean Dakin, to ask that the farmers market be closed. Lee Johnson of 415 Lincoln Avenue asked that the market be open to help people provide for their food needs. Charles Plymeyer of 115 West Marshall Street also asked that the farmers market be closed. Valentin Todorov asked that the farmers market be closed. Mr. Gardner Humphreys wrote to ask for help in dispersing people at Roberts Park. He felt that it was unsafe to have people in close proximity in that park. Ann Lauer wrote about some approaches to keeping the farmers market open, including having pre-orders. Dr. Nanita Manongsong of 3842 Steps Court wrote to say that the farmers market should be closed. Linda Blossbaum of 708 Timber Lane wrote to ask about the possibility of later starts for construction now that people are home, working at home. And we had two more correspondences from Selena and Sean Dakin about the farmers market. And then Mr. Dakin also, by the way, at 124 Whittier Circle, Mr. Dakin also wanted to ask about how the tax rate would be affected by what the event is doing to the economy. And was asking for some kind of economic relief be considered. Mr. Donald Camp wrote in to ask if there was a way to get yard trash stickers without having to go out. And the Treasurer's Office did work with him, and there is a way you can call the Treasurer's Office, pay online, get yard waste stickers. And so he was pleased with that result, as were several others who've availed themselves. Ellen McCarthy asked that the volleyball net be taken down in Rosehill Park because people are congregating there. And those are our comments, and I don't have any more live comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. If you do get any more live comments, could you let us know so we make sure those people are heard? With that, why don't we turn it back over to Mr. Shields and Ms. Messner?
Wyatt, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tarter. So I will give a report on city operations. Cindy Mester will join me in that, and then Kieran Bob will provide a financial report, and Becky Witzman and Sally Cole will report on our efforts to support local businesses through this crisis. So what I would like to do in my report is to try to give a flavor of how the city is operating through this crisis. And I'm going to touch on city departments and describe some of the ways that we're delivering services under these circumstances. And I'll start with communications. Communications really is so key to all of our response. Every department is being served by Susan Finarelli and Claire Casey and pushing messages out about how the public can access city services and how the public can stay safe through this crisis. We're putting out a daily briefing through the Office of Communications every day, generally at about 2 p.m. We're in constant liaison with the Fairfax County Health Department and pushing out all of the health messages that are coming from them, as well as our state and federal partners. The city's webpage is being updated constantly, and we're pushing material out on social media. And for those who don't live in the digital world, we're trying to reach them through a full-page ad that's running regularly in the news press to try to share information through that medium as well. In the area of city public safety, obviously our police and sheriff are essential personnel, and they are reporting to work as normal. I do want to acknowledge and thank them for doing their jobs along with their colleagues across the country in very difficult circumstances. Our police department is following the watchwords of service, safety, and health. We're working to keep our officers safe while they keep the community safe. Our officers are equipped with personal protective equipment during all the interactions with the public or entering onto private property. We're conducting our roll calls and with effective distancing of officers. We're also conducting deep cleaning of the vehicles, which are shared by our officers in between shifts. With respect to enforcement of the governor's Executive Order 55, the stay-at-home order, our approach is to engage, inform, and educate. And there have been countless instances where the police have either been called because there's a concern or just noticed a gathering, and that has been their way of interacting with the public to try to keep people to practice safe social distancing. We have not made any arrests or any enforcement in that way, but instead engage, inform, and educate. We have noted, and this is region-wide, that in this crisis there has been an increase in property crimes or crimes of opportunity, and we've started a lock it or lose it campaign just to keep the public informed and reminded that we do need to lock our vehicles, lock our garages, our storage sheds, because we have seen an increase in property crime. I'd like to shift to our library. The Mary Riley Stiles Library, our public library staff are working very hard to deliver services virtually. We actually have an increase, and this is probably predictable. We've had an increase in requests for library cards during the stay-at-home period. We have the new service Canopy, which offers movie streaming, and that's particularly popular. We'll be hosting a virtual story time for the first time this week. We're hosting virtual book clubs, and our library staff are really being creative in figuring out how to reach the public and provide services for the public during this time of need. Our library staff have also been excellent in supporting our Office of Emergency Management, our Office of Communications, and our long-range planning team, where we're trying to plan out how this crisis is going to unfold over the coming weeks and months. In the area of recreation and parks, staff is administering refunds and credits for all of the canceled classes and programs, and that's involved work. Our parks are open, but generally all of the amenities in those parks are closed. Any amenity that would be an attraction to a gathering, we have closed or roped those off. Our regular park maintenance activity is ongoing. The Registrar of Voters is preparing for the Republican June primary for the U.S. Senate. David Bjerke is also speaking on a panel tonight about voting at home provisions, and he will continue to do everything he can to make voting as convenient for the public during this crisis. The Sheriff's Office is serving civil process just as they always do, but with enhanced procedures to keep staff and the public safe. The Department of Public Works, we are managing all of our projects and working to keep them on schedule. The library project, for example, is under construction, and we'll be sending out regular updates to the City Council and to the community on that project, and we'll also be standing up a virtual library construction oversight committee. The spring paving cycle is moving forward. Hillwood Avenue obviously was paved over the past week, but we'll be completing the spring paving over the coming days. The neighborhood traffic calming project at Gundry and Annandale is very nearly complete. It was worked on over the past 3 weeks, and we are having meetings virtually on the Great Falls and Little Falls designs for traffic calming. Public Works operations are essential personnel, and they're working here in the city on site and using social distancing measures to keep our staff safe. We've also just tonight are having all of city staff that are reporting to work follow the CDC's guidelines for face coverings, and that includes our public works staff, our police staff, our IT staff who are reporting for work as essential personnel. The office or the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development, you will hear in just a moment of the hard work we're doing to promote assistance for our local businesses. But a couple other notes: building permits are now entirely electric for plan review and for plan approvals. As a new feature, we're conducting residential inspections when possible via Google Duo. And so we will not need to have an inspector on site for residential inspections, but we'll be able to do that virtually as well. The major projects are proceeding. Founders Row construction is largely on track. The George Mason High School construction is also largely on schedule, although the schools have been notified of certain delays from manufactured items coming from states that have shut down their manufacturing installations. So that we'll get additional information on how, if that might affect ultimately the larger schedule for the high school. But so far it's on track. We also are keeping our normal infrastructure planning meetings for the 10-acre site on track. We'll have a meeting on Wednesday, as we have been doing every 2 weeks, to make sure that the infrastructure for the 10-acre site is proceeding per plan. The Treasurer, Commissioner of Revenue, and the Assessor of Real Estate are all open for business by phone or electronically. For those who prefer to pay taxes by check rather than through the online payment portal, there is a new yellow drop box that the Department of Public Works has installed just outside the main entrance to City Hall that the public can use as well. Our Human Services staff has been very busy throughout this entire crisis. I'll just note a couple things that our Human Services staff are doing. One, the Aurora House is open and is an essential service. We do have clients at the Aurora House, and we're providing counseling services for them there, and the young residents there are using video conferencing for their classes and for their appointments. Staff has developed a volunteer opportunities page on the city website, and we've made arrangements for volunteers to work with Volunteer Fairfax in order to be matched with COVID-related projects that operate within the city limits. Staff contacted all 3 of the grocery stores in the city to ask them to have senior shopping hours where only seniors can shop in the early mornings, and all of the 3 grocery stores have put in procedures to that effect for at least one day of the week. We've continued our outreach to our multifamily properties, to the faith community, to the nonprofit community, to inform, engage, and educate on recommended measures to keep residents safe and suppress the spread of virus. We are also maintaining direct contact with all of our vulnerable populations. And we're doing that, for all of the people who regularly receive services from the city. So we're staying in close contact with them. For instance, the Fair Wheels program for our seniors, we're either delivering Fair Wheels by mail or in person as needed. And lastly, I'll just note, and for Human Services, that staff did install the Pinwheel Garden at Cherry Hill Park as part of Child Abuse Awareness and Prevention Week, an acknowledgement that nationally domestic violence and child abuse is worsening with the stay-at-home orders that are in place nationwide. And we want to raise awareness and try through awareness to prevent that. Our IT department has been central to all of this. IT Services is supporting all of staff and council with their remote work activities, and they're also ensuring the safety of the city network from cybercrime at this time of unprecedented remote access. IT staff are also installing the storage area network, the SANS, which the council approved 2 months ago. So major projects ongoing with IT. Human Resources, the city is under a hiring freeze, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the context of Ms. Bawa's financial report in just a moment. But HR is supporting all of our departments to ensure that the workforce remains connected and engaged through this remote working process, and for all of our essential personnel to ensure that work is being done safely. We're also implementing the Families First Act as it impacts city employees. Just a few more notes. Our city finance department. We are tracking all reimbursable expenses and filling out the reports to our state and federal authorities with the hope and expectation that some of the city's costs in responding to this disaster will be reimbursed on behalf of our taxpayers. The finance department is also modeling the fiscal impact and making revised forecasts and preparing a revised budget, as you'll hear more of in just a moment. Our partners with the school administration have been doing tremendous work and basically reinventing how we educate our children through this crisis. But I also just want to note the great work that the schools are doing in the social services sphere in terms of delivering meals to those in need and services to those in need. And it's really important work that our school administration is doing along with everything else they're doing. Lastly, I just want to note our Office of Emergency Management. Joe Carter has been coordinating really all aspects of the city's response through this emergency. We have stood up our Emergency Operations Center, and we're keeping it open in a monitoring mode, and that is our conduit of information to our state, Virginia Department of Emergency Management, and to FEMA. The city has organized its response along the National Incident Management System hierarchy and structure, and that's helpful for staff just for clarifying roles and responsibilities as we do that, as we carry out this response. OEM has also helped with all of our first responders in securing the use of personal protective equipment in the course of their work. And the purpose of this report tonight really is to convey that the city government, while our facilities are closed, the government itself is open and moving forward. And I want to thank all the city staff and council for your can-do spirit, the innovation that has gone into this, and everyone's flexibility during this pandemic, which is unlike anything we've ever experienced. At the end of the day, I think the city has years of growing reliance on technology, but that has really gone into warp drive in the past 3 weeks as we've made this big transition. Some of the big tasks coming forward will be continuing to help our community weather the economic fallout from this pandemic, which will be severe, and steering the city organization through which will be very significant revenue reductions, at least in the short term, but possibly also in the longer term. These policy changes as a result of both will be areas of significant work with the City Council and the community in the coming weeks. I'm going to transition now to Cindy, but if I also could just note that as the mayor noted at the beginning of this meeting, I did have to take leave for a family emergency with the sickness and death in the past week of my mother. And throughout this crisis, really, I've just been struck, one, by how wonderful my family has been in getting through this crisis, but also how wonderful city staff have been in terms of just everyone stepping up to do what needs to be done and to try to help move the city forward. So I'm very grateful to that. And Cindy has helped us with their liaison work with Congressman Beyer, Senator Warner, Governor Northam, and the White House. The mayor and council have been involved in all of those efforts at the regional, state, and federal level. And so let me turn it over to Cindy for a report on those areas. And then from there, we'll go to Karen Bawa. And then after that, Becky Witzman and Sally Cole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shield, and good evening, Council. Just a few things to highlight to supplement the ending remarks that Mr. Shields had in terms of our regional, state, and federal efforts. There have been 3 federal COVID-19 federal legislation approved. The stimulus money we've been hearing about. Phase 1 focused on federal loans, public health, and a lot of the necessary protective equipment our public safety personnel needed. The second legislation was focused on our vulnerable population, some of the food and nutritional resources, funding and/or waivers so we could continue to serve low-income food, lunch meals, and so forth, as well as the Family Leave Act that Mr. Shields mentioned earlier. Along with that, concurrently, some transit federal stimulus money. Phase 3 is the one that's received a lot of focus on and will be highlighted in a moment on the small business piece. It definitely included the small business paycheck protection, but it also included resources for individuals in terms of a direct federal payment and increased unemployment benefits, funding for hospitals, nursing homes, and medical facilities, disaster relief, and for local and state governments, it had economic stability resources for the City of Falls Church. That funding will go to the state, and we're working closely with the state to ensure our outreach and funding back locally. That third phase of the federal stimulus also had resources for homeless and mail-in elections. A lot of those details are now being finalized, and we'll continue to actively track that. As it relates to working with the state government to implement the federal stimulus pass-through, as well as what clearly will be an amended FY21 budget for the state as well. General Assembly is due to reconvene April 22nd and receive budget amendments from the governor. That was scheduled before the COVID-19 emergency. It will now be much more complex as their revenue projections at the state level are adjusted, as we will hear shortly, for local. And we will be working with the governor to reduce negative impacts to localities, since this is where the core services are being delivered. So on behalf of council, the mayor did send a letter, and all of our peers in Northern Virginia, to the governor, asking for the recognition that local governments are the front line in delivering services, and to make sure there be no or minimal impact to localities. Make sure funding is there for our health departments and our mental health services as we go through this crisis. Also looking at the schools, as Mr. Shields indicated, shifting to this new online delivery has cost implications. And then also looking to offset some of the lost revenue at the local level from things like sales and meals tax. So we'll continue to work closely with the governor and the General Assembly members. That letter was also sent to Senator Saslaw and Delegate Simon, who represent the city. Another area of focus we've been working on closely is WMATA. That's a large funding contribution and responsibility for the city, as well as with the cutback in services, they're losing ridership fares. There is federal stimulus focused on transit, and so we're working with WMATA, the compact members of WMATA and NVTC, our regional partner, to make sure that WMATA gets revenue offset from that federal stimulus for the ridership fares going down, but also to support the local jurisdiction's contribution, because our revenue that would fund that is also going down. And with that, I'll close on specifics that we're working on the state on. The budget did have previously increased police funding, library funding, community development funding, business funding, and also a grant specific to the City of Falls Church for affordable housing. So as the governor is working through the budget amendment, I and staff will continue to work really closely to monitor federal and state financial implications. And with that, I will pass the baton over to Ms. Bawa and bring up her presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Ms. Bawa, are you there?
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you and see you. Welcome.
Perfect. Do you see the presentation?
I don't know.
It's coming up now. Give it a moment.
Okay.
I hope. And the presentation should be visible.
Yep.
Okay, great. I'll start. So as reported earlier, with the recent COVID flare-up, economy has come to a halt. And as an immediate effect, our local revenues are impacted significantly, which make up approximately 30% of the total revenue budget. Slide number 2 shows projected decline for each of these revenue categories for the remaining 4 months of the current fiscal year that ends on June 30th. Absent any real revenue collection data for the month of March, staff is presenting 2 scenarios, moderate and worse, capturing different severity of the projected decline. Slowdown in the local economy and people out of jobs could result in delinquencies and a potential shortfall of up to 1 to 2% in the real property taxes. Any deferrals that we may offer in these real estate tax payments could possibly add a further decline. With the closure of businesses and in-dining restaurant, sales tax, meals tax, transient occupancy taxes are expected to take a big hit. Sales tax are projected to see a decline of 25 to 50%, meals taxes 50 to 75%, and transient occupancy taxes 75 to 90% for the remaining 3 to 4 months. Also, the community center is closed with full loss of revenue from various athletic events, hobby classes, and camps. Fines and forfeitures, including parking, moving violations, and court fines, are expected to see a drop of approximately 50% of revenues for the remaining 4 months. Investment income is expected to drop by at least 50% as a result of recent drop in interest rates. The next slide provides a granular look at each of these revenue categories. Please bear with me, it is a busy slide. So the first number column shows the adopted budget for fiscal year 2020, the current fiscal year. The next set of columns with a blue header shows the moderate projection with a moderate scenario. And the next set of columns with the orange or salmon color on top shows the worst case projection which includes actuals received to date plus projections for the remaining 4 months of the fiscal year. So real property collection rate typically is 99.2%. The moderate projection assumes 98% collection rate for the second payment, which is due on June 5th, and 97% for the worst case scenario. This year, we have not received any deferred taxes that we normally do in the second half of the fiscal year. And the abatements are still down compared to the budget, 392 that was set aside for that. As seen previously, for the personal property tax has been down due to downward trend in business tangibles. These projections assume not receiving additional funding from collections in the remaining part of the fiscal year. The sales taxes for the first 6 months was ahead by 15% of the budget and over 10% year-over-year increase over fiscal year 19. That, along with a projected decline of 25% for the moderate case, would still be ahead of the budget, but a 50% decline would be below the budget target for this fiscal year. Meals taxes at February end was 6% over the budget and roughly 7% over fiscal year 19 actuals for the same window. But in March alone, meals taxes 6% below the fiscal year 19 March sales. So assuming 50 to 75% decline for the remaining months of fiscal year 20 could result in projected collection decline of 14% below budget. BPOL business license deadline was March 1st. The Commissioner of Revenue has reported roughly 80% of the businesses paid by the deadline, which is slightly below the normal levels. They are in the process of pursuing non-filers in the coming month. It is expected about 90% of the businesses will remit this payment by the end of the time we close the fiscal year. Other taxes include utility, communication, cigarette taxes, which are projected to come in at roughly 90% of the normal collections. Vehicle rentals are projected at 0%. For the remaining 4 months, TOT, the hotel tax, at 75 to 90% between the two scenarios, and recordation tax is at 50 to 75% decline for the remaining 4 months. Next, I would like to focus on the licenses and permits, which are projected to end above budget by roughly $727,000 due to receipt of permit fees from large capital projects in the pipeline. These collections are typically held in the permit fee reserve to address the work associated with the multi-year nature of these large projects. As you may recall, that was done with the fiscal year 19 year end. Charges for services include revenues from recreation and park events, hobby classes, and camps, which are projected to be 0% for the remaining 4 months of the fiscal year. We have started processing refunds for previously planned activities through this time frame. Fines and forfeitures include fines from parking, moving violations, and court fines, which are expected to drop by at least 70 to 9%, realizing only revenues from the red light cameras and reduced court fines that we would see in the next couple of months. Investment revenues are projected to decline by half for the remaining months due to the reduced interest rates. We are currently earning 1.1% on the liquidity pool and 2.1% on the 1 to 3 year bond fund. Moving along, so on an overall picture, we are projecting a revenue gap of 1.7 million to 3.5 million for this fiscal year, which is a little short of 2 to 4% of the fiscal year 20 adopted budget. Tax revenues make up roughly 65 to 70% of this revenue gap. Slide 5 shows a list of balancing measures for the general government to address the revenue gap. For the moderate case, we are required to freeze all recruitment for vacant positions till June, freeze travel and training, and realize underspending resulting from cancellation of various recreation programs. Essentially, as of now, these measures are already in place. And for the worst case scenarios, deferral of various capital and maintenance projects will be required, including facilities reinvestment projects using pay-as-you-go funding, operating funding for paving, traffic signal, spot improvement maintenance programs that we have in the budget. Also deferring neighborhood traffic calming projects funded with one-time fund that was appropriated by council, $400,000 with the last year-end one-time money. And additionally, use of the city's reserve may be required to balance depending on the severity of the revenue gap. Slide number 6, fiscal year 2021 projections are affected both by the severity and the longevity of the economic slowdown. Absent any real data so far, we are looking at moderate and worst scenarios in tax revenues. Real property assessments as of January 1st, 2020 still offset projected drop in other revenues. It is expected that the growth of 3 to 4% in real estate assessments will not be sustainable in fiscal year 2022, and an expected challenge in the longer term is definitely expected. With increase in unemployment and possible closure of businesses, it is expected that recovery would be at a slower pace, even if the current situation softens in the first few months of the next fiscal year. The revenue projections for the fiscal year 2021 are expected to see double-digit drops for most of the local tax categories as of the projections that we are seeing. We are working in concert with some of the neighboring jurisdictions, and we realize the nuances that each one has to work through their own jurisdictions, but some helpful data from forecasting and economic forecasts that are floating around is helpful. On a bigger picture, continuation of the economic downturn in the revenues to the beginning of the next fiscal year could result in a revenue gap of $5.5 million to $8.5 million compared to the proposed budget, fiscal year 2021 budget that was presented by the city manager 4 weeks ago on March 9th. Essentially, it is projected that we may see a drop of roughly $1.3 million to $3.9 million compared to our existing fiscal year 2020 adopted budget, which is similar to the year-end projections for the current fiscal year, which include 3 to 4 months of aberration from the normal trend. We will refine these projections in the coming days and weeks and bring specific balancing measure line item as part of the revised 2021 budget ordinance to council. For immediate relief measures for the regional initiatives that are in place, some of the neighboring jurisdictions are providing extensions for tax payment or waiving late payment penalty and interest on local taxes, specifically Arlington. The treasurer has determined that late payment penalty and interest will not be imposed on local taxes with a payment due date between March 13th and April 30th. If the taxes are paid in full by May 31st, 2020. Alexandria adopted an emergency ordinance to impose moratorium on penalties and interest for restaurant meals taxes, the transient occupancy taxes, and DPOL, the business license taxes, till June 30th. Also includes a provision for refund of the March payment at zero penalty. City of Fairfax Council adopted an ordinance with 90-day extension for monthly meals tax payments due in March, April, and May, and for the quarterly TOT payment that's due in April, so extending that to July. Town of Vienna is proposing a resolution on April 13th for town council consideration to waive penalty and interest on meals taxes. On April 7th, Town of Herndon Council is expected to take action on 90-day extension on the transient occupancy tax for March, April, May, and June payments. The Loudoun County Board of Supervisors has approved to move the personal property tax deadline from May 5 to June 5th, a 30-day extension. As for the real estate tax payments, Fairfax Board approved a 1-month extension for paying the first installment of real estate taxes from July 28th to August 28th, which is the next fiscal year. Both Town of Vienna and Herndon Council is scheduled to consider a 30-day deferral of the real estate tax payments as well, and they are aligned with Fairfax July to end of July to end of August. Arlington County due date is June 15, and they have not announced any change to that yet. We continue to work with our other jurisdictions. Slide number 9 has some more of these relief measures. Extension, both Fairfax and Alexandria have approved an extension of 60 and 75 days for tax relief applications for seniors and people with disabilities. Respectively, both jurisdictions are additionally providing deferral of personal property filing deadlines by 30 to 60 days. Governor's COVID directive includes continuation of water and sewer services for all Virginia jurisdictions with no discontinuation in service. As for City of Falls Church, by way of immediate action, the treasurer has initiated a 30-day extension for real estate tax relief applications to seniors and people with disability. Staff will return to council for further action based on direction from council at this meeting or at a later date. The next steps on slide 10 include updated revenue projection once March sales for meals and hotel taxes are received by late April. We expect to bring a revised fiscal year 2021 budget, which would need a public hearing, first reading, second hearing, and for the adoption of the budget, CIP, and tax rate ordinances with any balancing measures that would be required. Additionally, any changes and reductions in programs in the current fiscal year would also require that we bring the fiscal year 2020 budget amendments, and we will require that would be done as part of an ordinance, which would require 2 hearings as well. So the dates are still being worked based on the virtual meeting setup. However, we hope to accomplish this by early part of June, given we could have 2 meetings in May. And with that, I conclude my presentation, and we are available to answer any questions from council now or at a later time. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go on to the presentation of Ms. Witzman and Ms. Cole, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments. Hey, are you available?
I am. This is Becky. Good evening, members of council. We've put together, is it up? Yep. Okay.
It is. Yeah.
Let me first start by thanking Sally Cole and so many of you and others who've been so great to work with during the health crisis so far. We've put together a summary spreadsheet that you see on the screen before you now of the various business assistance efforts we've undertaken so far or that we are working on now. To very briefly review some of the highlights of what's on the spreadsheet, and I know it's probably difficult to read, it's the font's not very big. Our efforts generally fall into 4 categories: business communications, business promotion, business assistance, and business recovery. First, regarding business communications, we expect to continue to collaborate with Sally and the Chamber and many others to strategize and act to assist our businesses. Under outreach on the chart, as a result of one of our collaborative efforts, we sent out 3 emails to our businesses, strongly encouraging them to apply for the Federal Paycheck Protection Program funds and providing some basic information and details on how to do so. Finally, as you would imagine, we have been receiving calls and emails from businesses, and we will continue to respond to those quickly. We have also been reaching out to our businesses and landlords and expect to do more of that this week and ongoing. Second, regarding business promotion, I think this is an especially important category since the feedback we're receiving is that many city businesses and areas of the city look closed, though they are not. So picking up on what Federal Realty has done up at Falls Plaza with the colorful grab-and-go banners, we've ordered similar banners that we intend to distribute to businesses. The banners should be available the middle of this week. They're large, 3 feet by 8 feet long, and they will have a blank white area on them so that businesses can customize them if they'd like, with their phone number, hours, website info, or whatever. You can see the proof for the banners on the left side of the spreadsheet, that kind of pink grab and go. It has the city logo on it, and it says, "Yes, we are open." Also regarding restaurant promotion, early on, we made phone calls to all of our restaurants to see if they were offering takeout or delivery. We're continuing to update that list as we're aware of businesses that have since reopened, like Dogwood Tavern. In the next few days, we are hopeful that we'll be able to also add hot links to the city website, to the websites of menus of those restaurants to make takeout ordering easier. Lastly, in this category, we're working on a list of non-restaurant city retail businesses that are open so that we can add that information to the city website as well. Third, regarding business assistance in general, we plan to continue to monitor what other jurisdictions are doing for their small businesses during the pandemic so that we might consider additional measures that would benefit our businesses. We would also like to share some ideas that resulted from some of our internal staff discussions. Specifically, we would recommend consideration of temporarily relaxing some of our zoning and regulations and publicizing those temporary zoning changes. For instance, possibly allowing more liberal placement of temporary signs and banners to promote a drive-up, carry-out style of food or other goods, such as possibly allowing temporary window signs and more sandwich board signs, but all only to the extent that vision or safety obstructions are not created in any of these instances. Another idea is the possibility of temporarily closing down the westbound curb lane of West Broad Street between Applebee's and Paisanos from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily to facilitate curbside pickups from businesses. On the left side of the chart, next to the grab and go banner, you can see a reserved parking sign that the City of Alexandria is using for a similar purpose. This temporary lane closure, possibly using city electronic signboards to direct traffic away from that lane, could be lifted when Broad Street traffic picks up again. Fourth and last, regarding business recovery. I really have no idea yet what a business recovery program for the city might look like, but I wanted to include it on the list as a future item to consider. I thought I might throw out the possibility that there could possibly be a business recovery task force created. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be very happy to hear any and all other business assistance and recovery ideas that anybody would care to share. Thank you very much.
I think I just add a few things here. Can you all hear me?
Excuse me?
Can
Is
you
this
all
Sally?
hear me?
Yes, hi, Sally. We can.
Hi.
Hi.
Just wanted to mention that, we've been working very closely with Becky and with Bob Young and with Mike Diener to try to really get this information about some of the federal resources to our businesses as quickly as possible. We've done that pretty well, I think. I do want everybody to keep in mind that these businesses, just like us, all of us, we're all worried about our family, we're all worried about our friends. These folks are also worried about their employees. And in many cases, these folks this is also their only income. Their only income. And I think, honestly, the restaurants, they're lucky if they're doing 10% of their business. I suspect it's much less than that, even if they're doing takeout. I also just wanted to mention that the video that we've created, which features some of our beloved business owners talking about ways in which people can support the business community. And we also have a page on our website now that has that also lists ways that you can support the business community, whether it's through grab and go or online ordering or taking virtual classes or sharing social media, all of that kind of stuff. It's all on our website now, along with the whole page of resources as well. It would be fantastic, and I'm speaking selfishly. Well, it's not really selfishly, it's on behalf of the businesses. I would love to see the city take a more proactive approach in communicating some of those resources to our businesses. I'd like to see more communications on that. But anyway, I would like to just finish by saying that I've been really impressed and inspired by our businesses who have really pivoted to figure out how to make some kind of money during this period. They've, with the grab and go, with they've figured out the technology to be able to order online. They've really gone above and beyond, and some have really gone even beyond that by changing up their operations. Lazy Mike's is actually, this is just a kind thing to do, giving food to hospital employees. We've got free counseling for healthcare workers from Sunstone Counseling. Falls Church Distillers and Eco Health did the free hand sanitizer. All Things CBD has free sanitizer, hand sanitizer. Zoya's Atelier is making masks. A couple of businesses, Realtor Allison Miller and Neighborhood Barbershops Dustin Foley, had set up Facebook pages to help people support one another, to support our community. All of our businesses, a lot of them are doing, those that can, are doing virtual classes, many free, many for a donation. I think the businesses are really struggling, and I think they need our help, and the more we can do to support them, not just by giving them information and supports directly, but by sharing their needs, the better. And that's all I have.
All right. Well, thank you, Sally, Becky, Kieran, Cindy, and Wyatt for all that you have been doing and all that you will do. And for this update just now is quite informative. Why don't we go ahead and open this up to questions and comments from council? Does anyone have any questions or comments on any of the presentations we've just heard? Folks still there? I can't see anyone on the screen right now other than Sally.
Mayor Charter,
Can
why
you
don't
walk
you go?
with me?
I bet everyone has something to say. Do you want to just
Sure.
go through every council member and ask?
Sure. Why don't we start with you?
Okay. Here's my questions. The first one is, I noticed today that the Parks and Recreation has a page on their website. The staff has put together a list of fun things for kids to do on spring break. So that's another thing that Mr. Shields didn't mention in his report about what Rec and Parks is doing. And I wanted to ask about the citizen comment about the volleyball net. Has the volleyball net come down, or are we going to take the volleyball net down?
Vice Mayor Connolly, the volleyball net has either been removed or it will be removed tomorrow morning.
Okay. And what about basketball hoops? Are they down?
No, they are not down. We are keeping an eye on the public courts, and if there are groups gathered there, then we're dispersing them.
I have noticed that the nearby ones in Fairfax County have been removed, so I would think that people who can't play in Fairfax may be ending up in Falls Church as well. So I think we should probably follow suit there as well. All right. Something about the schools I just want to say. I really want to recognize teachers and principals and school leaders for the work that they've done in the last 3 weeks to pivot quickly to online learning. It has been quite a lift for our students and our teachers and parents, and I just want to congratulate everybody on the hard work that they've all done together to make this work. And we all know it hasn't been perfect, but there's a lot more learning to do, and our schools, I think, have been leaders in the community and in the state and probably in the country on pivoting so quickly to online learning, and the quality of instruction that is going home to kids is really impressive, and we should all be really proud of what our teachers are doing for the kids in our community. Also on the schools, Mr. Shields mentioned in his report that the schools were might be delayed on some block for the schools, but that actually has been fixed. So I just want to update everyone that that school problem has been resolved, and the school is definitely on schedule to be finished at George Mason High School at this point. So that's good news. The resolution that we passed, the emergency resolution, will that allow boards and commissions to meet on different topics or only emergency related topics?
It will only be emergency and continuity of government. So it's going to be quite limited.
So for example, the Arts and Humanities Council wanted to meet about murals on Founders Row. Will that have to wait, or is that continuity of government?
I believe that will have to wait.
Okay. And then Sally Cole mentioned that she thought there was more that the city could be doing for outreach to businesses. And I'm just wondering, what more can we be doing? Because it sounds like we're doing a lot, but what other things could we be doing?
Yeah, and I apologize for how that sounded. Becky has been on top of everything from the very beginning. Her entire office has been. I just haven't seen much in the way of official communications from the city, really regarding our business community in ways that they can be supported other than the restaurants.
Okay. Do we have a list of all the businesses? Does Tom Clinton have a list, or Jody Acosta's office have a way to reach out to all those businesses?
Well, and they did. I think I believe Becky and Susan coordinated an email. There are 1,500 businesses, so
right.
Not all of those are affected, honestly, because some of them are work-at-home consultants, and they're probably doing okay. But as far as the downtown businesses, the more visible businesses, there are a lot of ways that people can be supporting them, and it would be nice to have that information shared. Or even just to share and selfishly again, share our video, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And Becky individually has done a great job of that.
Okay.
Well, I will say it's been a challenge to get messaging out to the businesses because we didn't have a good list before all this happened. We did pull one together, but we've been a little bit restricted in terms of how we could use it. We're going to work on that. That's something all of us recognize we need to have and will want to use going forward.
Okay, and it sounds like the kind of thing the list of business would want to be on. So
yes, that's exactly what it was. They have to opt in to be on that list, and we didn't have that kind of a list.
Okay. And then my last question, Mr. Shields, is really about, you mentioned what our Health and Human Services Department is doing to reach out to vulnerable populations and people. There may be a lot more people that are more vulnerable than they were 3 weeks ago. And I just want to make sure that we're keeping an eye out for people that are newly vulnerable because they've lost a paycheck or because their business is struggling. And is there a way, is it on the city website, or are there ways that people can reach out and ask for help? Are we on the lookout for those people? And what are things that we can do as a city council and community?
One of the big areas of concern is, just as one example, is emergency rental assistance. That's probably the number one issue that people are contacting the city about. And so we need to come back with some ideas on how we can help people in that situation. We have gone to all of the multifamily property owners in the city to make sure that they're aware of the governor's order preventing evictions for non-payment of rent over this emergency period. So that outreach has happened, but direct emergency assistance for tenants is something that we don't have the funding for, and so we're trying to figure out how we can be of assistance through that. There is some assistance through the federal legislation that was enacted, and so that's one avenue. But your point is well taken, and so I've just given one example of that, but I know there are many more.
Okay, and I do want to make sure that our residents who are English is not their first language are aware that that evictions have been put on hold by the governor and the state, at least through the end of April. And I want to make sure that that message gets out to the Spanish-speaking and other language-speaking community.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all for me, Mr. Tartar.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hardy.
Great. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to work backwards, probably from Mary Beth's list as well. So thank you all for all the hard work and the very detailed presentation. It was very informative. Clearly, there's been a lot of effort going on behind the scenes to kind of make all this happen. On business communication outreach, a general comment. Everyone is so overwhelmed with information right now. I would just caution against us only relying on social media, especially because social media only promotes things that are paid. And so a lot of times we think we push out a communication and it honestly just doesn't reach people because we're overwhelmed with all the other news out there. And so to the extent that we can use the newsletter, I think that's great that we've had a new daily newsletter, something for us to think about for business outreach as well. Just I think direct contact is a much better way of getting to people other than expecting people to see something that's posted on Facebook. On the vulnerable population, I shared Mary Beth's concern around evictions, making sure everyone is aware of that. What other outreach, I guess, have we done? Has it just been in-person outreach, Wyatt, to kind of our vulnerable populations? I know we did initial kind of meals distribution with the Winter Hill seniors. What other efforts have been underway and how can the community help support that?
Well, generally it's been contacting by phone. We were doing visits early in this crisis, but now it is generally by phone to reach out to clients who are already involved, have signed up for city services, like our senior citizens. We are, I think by having a high profile with our city communications, we're inviting people to contact us, and HHS is getting calls from people who do have needs, and we're helping them meet those needs as best we can.
There's a lot of great, I guess, homegrown efforts that are happening in the community. So a couple of neighborhood groups have formed to kind of help either kind of seniors or people with compromised immune systems not have to go out and do their own grocery shopping. And so I don't know, they're not really in need of money, but really I think it's great to see neighbors helping neighbors. And so if the city can help promote those or let people know that those are available, so they may not need financial assistance, but really it's best for anyone over the age of 65, for example, not to go into the grocery store. And so I think it's great that there's neighbors offering help like that. And so it may not be the same kind of help we're thinking about, but I think it's important for us to think about how we can connect people in those ways. So working backwards again. So boards and commissions. I think I heard the city attorney mention that the emergency ordinance we passed would also be for boards and commissions, but they would only be able to meet under kind of very limited definition of continuity of government and emergency as well.
That's
correct. There's going to be some sort of communication that will go out to our boards with that so they know they're kind of on hold.
Maybe the clerk can mention that, but I believe that has already gone out at least to the liaisons, but I think it was also sent to I don't know, I think the liaisons were expected to send it to the boards and commissions. Celeste, is that correct? I think you sent that to the boards and to the liaisons.
We did early on, and we are working on something to send out most likely Wednesday. We were waiting for this emergency ordinance to be adopted, and so I think there's going to be a message probably going out from the mayor and the city manager just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And we're going to have some policies about if you have an item you think is something that needs to be dealt with during the emergency, then that would go through a process with the city attorney and the city manager.
Okay, so there's some sort of like appeal process where they can say, hey, we think we have something that actually merits falling within the emergency, and then they can contact you all to figure out whether they can meet.
Right, that's the policy we're working on, because we generally, it comes to the city manager's office, the city attorney reviews it in normal times, and we put it on the agenda appropriately. So we need to have some guidelines that work within the emergency ordinance that people know how to follow. So
great. Okay, so working backwards again. So on the update from Becky, I think a lot of the zoning changes mentioned, like that really just don't cost us a lot of money, but make it possible for businesses to recoup some of their money, I think makes sense. So signage changes, designated pickup areas, carryout zones, relaxing sidewalk and parking lot vending rules, I think makes sense as well. What do we have to do to make those things happen? Is this something that can be done administratively? Do we need to take a vote on it? How do we move forward on those?
Well, zoning ordinances would need to be changed by an ordinance. We can look at whether emergency ordinances are needed, and we can also look at, as we update and come back to you with an additional ordinance regarding authority for the Director of Emergency Management, we can look at whether those things may be appropriate for that ordinance to get them passed quickly and be something that the manager can do before council can get to them.
Yes, so I would suggest that we think about creative ways to make some of those things happen. So if we have to wait a month for kind of 2 votes on an ordinance, many of these businesses don't have cash beyond 1 or 2 months. And so I think this really is a matter of, can they keep their businesses going? And so I'd hate for us to have to take 1 or 2 months because we have to take 2 votes on some of these things. If we think they're relatively low risk and we can do them quickly, I'd like to see that happen. And I would support those. Becky, I think a request I'd have is I'd also just be interested in hearing from the businesses what would help them. I think regionally we've looked at a lot of good ideas out there, but if there's any unique asks that we have from our community, maybe Sally and Becky can let us know if there's other things that they've thought of that would help them kind of keep their business going, especially if there's some non-eatery type businesses that we're thinking of. A lot of people in the service industry are really just on hold. And I think the restaurants probably have an advantage in that they can actually do some carry out and take out, but there may be other ones that we need to think about as well.
It's my hope to do a lot more of that this week, reaching out individually.
Great. One additional idea just to add to the list. I've heard of an idea around microloans. So I know that in the city, we clearly don't have a lot of capability to offer out large financing, and the federal government may help with some of the plugging with that. But if there's microloans that we can consider helping some small businesses beyond kind of what the SBA does, I don't know what the need might be, but it's at least worth adding to the list.
Is Sally still on?
I am. If I could.
Go ahead.
So Fax is looking at microloans, which is great. I'll tell you though, the thing I'm hearing most from businesses is we don't need loans, we need cash that we don't have to pay back. They're going to come out, I keep about, different jurisdictions that are providing, a 30-day or a 60-day deferment. In the next 30 and 60 days, it's only going to get worse. So deferments need to be longer, honestly, than even 60 days, 90 days, even longer than that. But loans, I think loans would help some people. But most of these guys are trying to figure out a way not to incur any more debt because they're already in debt heavily.
Thank you, Sally. So my other question had to get back to Cindy's presentation around the timing of the 4th federal legislation and the revised, state budget. What is the timing of those things? And how does that sync up to the timelines of the budget, FY21 budget that Kieran presented?
On the state perspective, the budget amendment is still proposed to come back to the General Assembly on April 22nd. Don't have a deadline yet or a timeline as to what we might learn in advance of that, what the governor would file. Also, the General Assembly is obviously working through all the logistics for convening safely in a COVID compliant manner. So that's what we know on the state level. There's still clearly a federal commitment to another federal stimulus bill. Some of it might be to expand what we have on 3. Some of it may be to extend and add more money. As Ms. Cole indicated, this is a longer duration. Haven't seen any concrete timeline yet. I know it's actively being worked in committee and between different members of Congress. And I think once they get something coming together a little bit, then we'll see more publicity and a timeline. But I will continue to work with Mr. Shields and tracking these items and keep council posted as we learn more. And hopefully another round of calls will occur with our senator and congressman and governor.
Okay. I guess so with that being the wild cards, not knowing how those numbers will come in general, it seems like we'll have to be pretty conservative in the redo of the FY21 budget. Okay, so moving on to the budget impacts. And so I think, let me look back at my notes. So overall takeaway I heard is kind of a 1.7 to 3.5 million shortfall for FY20. And then FY21 was 5.5 to 8.5 versus what was proposed.
That is correct.
Okay. And so for FY21, why is the plan, are you kind of starting, kind of redoing from scratch? We're trying to figure out how we're going to start back from FY20 and then go back from there.
In broad outlines, start with FY20 and cut from there.
Okay. I think one thing that I want to just emphasize, and I think it's probably all in our minds, is I think when we do have to make some pretty drastic cuts, I think it's important for us to anchor back to our values. And I think more than ever, especially when we are going through historic crises like this, keeping obviously our commitments to education, our core service is really important. But I think all those basic human needs, I think our vulnerable population is probably going to be larger than before. And so I want to make sure we are thinking about things like the emergency rent relief, which traditionally hasn't gotten a ton of money, but obviously we'll need a lot more than what we've invested thus far. And so I want to make sure we think about those fundamentals in the budget, even as we pare back. And then last request, given that our council meetings have to be restricted to emergency status, and clearly there's lots of other city business that's been happening as well, I think we need to give some thought on how we can keep council and maybe the public updated on those. So I don't know if that's like a monthly update on here's kind of projects that we're not going to just be able to discuss during council meetings, or what you think the best way to do that is, Wyatt.
It is a big challenge. So I'll just take one area as an example, and those would be decisions that need to be made with respect to land use cases. I've asked the planning staff to just lay out what are all the things that are applications pending, and see what we can do to figure out a schedule that we can communicate out back to the applicants and out to the public as to how they should be reasonably anticipating that they'll be handled. That's just one example of an area of concern that I think the city attorney would advise us is not directly related to the emergency, but yet is business that needs to proceed. So I think more to come on that. We are going to need, I think, a procedure to address those types of matters.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think in the interim, things like stormwater, which was obviously top of mind, and as we head into summer when we're more likely to get thunderstorms, being able to kind of keep people updated on what we're doing, or if, obviously that'll have budget impacts, but all the other projects that are happening, be able to keep us updated, even if we can't make decisions on them yet. Great, I think that's it for my questions for now.
All right, thank you. Mr. Duncan, do you have any comments or questions?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. I'll try to run through them pretty quickly and target them at specific people. I want to echo what's been said before about all the hard work everybody's done. Thank you very much. There's a million things that we could do, and obviously a limited number of hours in the day, so we're going to have to be very ruthless probably in prioritizing our work. Becky, just a rifle shot question. So the mailing that went out to all the businesses, the 15 and 1,700 some emails, that list was assembled and the mail did go out. Is that right?
It did.
Okay.
It was cobbled together from a couple of departments.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good thing that has happened. I'm not sure we've had that list at the ready before, and I certainly would encourage all businesses who receive that email to get get a response back so that we know they're there, and so that we can try to get information to them that may be helpful. It's probably not to express this negatively, but it's probably not realistic to expect that the City of Falls Church is going to be able to preserve every business. In the coming 6 months, there's going to be some things that are going to happen that we wish wouldn't happen, but we need to apply all efforts possible to get the money that is coming from the feds funneled to our businesses. And so as we develop the budget for next year, I just want to make sure that the job of being a person who liaisons with the state and the feds to help everyone in the city, especially our businesses, is a position that I think shouldn't be, the third thing that somebody has to do. It should be a very important priority, at least for the next 6 months. Right. That's sort of a comment, I guess, to the city manager as he develops the budget. Cindy, and this is a process question, the neighborhood traffic calming work that we're doing seems largely to have evolved kind of away from I don't want to say away from, but there's a stream of effort that involves essentially staff and key residents on the affected streets. Is that work going to be able to continue, through the end of this fiscal year, do you think? Or is that something that has to be suspended?
The funding piece certainly is in play, and based on council's reaction to my work with the city manager this week and Karen, we'll be able to decide if we can proceed with the construction projects, because that is pay-as-you-go for FY20 funds. That said, we were full steam working the community process during this period. We've sort of had to take a little bit of time to switch to a new process, but we have outreach to Little Falls, Great Falls Working Group, for example, to talk about convening a Skype call so we can bring everybody together to look at the latest concept plans that had been scheduled. It was either March 18th or 19th, and obviously we had to cancel the in-person meeting. So we're trying to keep that community engagement going. We have another conference call with another street this Thursday, and we're working on 3 more, trying to keep the community engagement process done. If financially we can proceed, we're actually finding the contractors are reaching out to us because they're finding openings in their calendars where other localities' big projects have had to cancel, go on hold, or maybe they haven't figured out a way, as we have, to keep our field inspectors out there working the construction project. So we're in a unique situation where we could actually proceed with some of the light and heavier solutions, and also some of the administrative solutions that we're undertaking in NTC, but we'll have to be cognizant of the funding constraints, looking at budget reductions for FY20. In the meantime, we'll get the community work going so that we're in a place to proceed if we're able to fund them.
Okay, thank you. That's a good, thorough answer to my question. I'm in the camp that says keep the relationships with the neighborhood going, and if it's possible to take advantage of lower prices. I don't know. Some of these things have been around for a long time, and the next 60 days could be very instrumental in getting work that we've been talking about for a number of years done, and at least we can check some things off the list. The question I have, I think, for Karen is around real estate performance. To what degree, how quickly do we know when, House X goes up for sale at an asking price and is bought? How quickly does that information feed back to us? Are we going to be able to see, in the next 30 days that real estate prices for home sales here, new and existing homes, has, dropped 10%, leveled off at about what it was before, seen no impact from the crisis that we're in? How quickly do we know that information?
So once the sale is recorded at the court, Arlington provides us monthly reports, and that is usually a month plus lagged. So I'm hoping that any impact that for April would come to us, or late March would come to us sometime in May.
Okay, that's pretty quick. Being that we are here in Littleville, people probably know, the day that the sale goes down, what the price is. I just feel like, again, in the next 60 days, that is going to be a crucial piece of information. What percentage of our, income comes from residential real estate? I'm sure there's a number that you've got in your head. It's a big number, though, right? I mean,
Residential is 70%.
Right. Okay. So if we see a
And
big
real estate taxes are 60% of the total budget.
Okay, so that makes my point. If we see a big change or no change, that tells us something about what life might look like once we get out from under the guillotine of the coronavirus. So I would encourage us to, keep as close a tabs on the folks in Arlington, or even just, use our own sources to find out from the real estate agent community how home sales are doing here.
However, one thing to keep in mind is that any properties that go on sale will not close immediately. So it will be a long term before we see, it won't be a month. It'll be at least good 3 to 4 months before we see kind of a trend.
Understand. But if we see a 25% drop in the sales price of a house, that it's sold next week, then we're in bigger problems than in the last Great Recession, where our drop off was, significant, but not as great as in other jurisdictions. And we rebounded faster than most jurisdictions and stronger too. So I know that the Great Recession and what we're in now is a different kind of critter, but anyway, people smarter than me can pontificate about that. One last thought, mail-in elections was mentioned. The June primary event will not be a big event, but it's an important event, I think, because if I had to guess right now, I would guess that the November election is going to have to be run under some sort of substantially modified approach, with many more states, including Virginia, doing aggressive vote by mail. So, I would encourage us to try to use the June primary as a drill to do as much as we can to prepare ourselves for voting by mail in November, because I think that might be something that'll be coming down the road. And our voter registrar is not got a large staff, probably isn't going to get a much bigger staff right now, but that's something that we need to try to do and try to get right. Okay, I think that's all I have for now. Thank you all.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Tarr. Try to bounce around a little bit. Maybe I'll start with Sally and Becky's presentation. Have you guys reached out to business owners that are opening businesses here, just to check on their timing? I know I've spoken with a few. Want to know what kind of help that we could offer. One that comes to mind is Solace Brewing's opening, how we're working to support them.
That's something I have intended to do and haven't quite gotten to, but I intend to do it this week.
Okay.
I've talked to a lot of the landlords, but that's not something we've specifically talked about.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how we can assist them, because they're in obviously a predicament as well.
Right.
And then some of the other new businesses that have opened up over there at the corner of Broad and Washington. I know that they're
the Toy Nest.
Yep, as well as the retro gaming. So I think you should put them on your list as well.
We'll do that.
And then Sally, I know
they are pivoting. I mean, Toy Nest is now, they were doing the pickup, now they're doing delivery only.
Okay.
And I think they'll be quite popular with people like Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Thank you very much so. Very much so. Thank you. Okay. So most of my questions, I think, really are for Kieran and Cindy and Wyatt. Just looking to 2021, as with a situation like this, I'm going to assume the worst, or plan for the worst. Hope that we get the best. For the projections that we have for 2021, the worst case scenario, it looks like we would consider drawing down on reserve. Kieran, what's our ability to draw down on reserve and not run afoul of some of the really solid planning that we've done in light of the debt issuance over the last year or two?
So currently, as far as for the unassigned fund balance, we have a 17% target, and we are at 18% of our operating budget. With the reformed financial policy, where the fund balance is looked at from a current available balance perspectives, we are roughly, that which includes the capital reserve in it, we are roughly over 30%. We're at 33% plus. That includes the recent payment that we received, the 6.5. So there is some room. However, we need to make sure that the debt service payments that are committed for the future years are addressed prior to shifting any reserves out for operations.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's key. I think that this we may be leaning more towards the worst case scenario as we look forward, and reserves are there for a reason, for times of extreme strain on the budget. However, I want to make sure that we're cognizant of our requirements for the debt that's already been issued for some of the large capital projects. Have you been able to get a sense of how well the grocery stores and the pharmacies are doing in town? Obviously, our restaurants are struggling mightily. But at the grocery stores and the drugstores, is it possible that they help make up for some of the lost sales revenue that we're going to experience on the retail side?
I'll let Wyatt also add to it, but from what I have heard of the happenings in the city, and also seeing that the online sales have gone up in the last few months, definitely that will make up for it'll offset some of the decrease in the other taxes that are resulting from closure of smaller businesses and a lot of activity that is down. However, do not have any substantive numbers to provide. It will definitely soften the loss, but not really sure that it will be able to offset it completely.
Okay. Are there any other fees or taxes that we've contemplated deferring for businesses in the city? Real estate, I know that I've probed that one a few times. I haven't received a direct answer back on whether, from a cash flow perspective, we could even handle that. And I don't think we're ready to go that direction yet. But some of the other smaller fees and taxes that may relieve some of the pressure for some of the smaller retail businesses, have we explored deferring any of those?
So we have started conversation on meals taxes are due on a monthly basis. They come on the 20th of the month. Like, for example, March payments are due on April 20th. And transient occupancy tax follow the same schedule. There is also legal discussion on that ground that businesses that have already charged, and this is not just at Falls Church, this is a larger legal group, and I'll let Carol defer to Carol for further explanation on this. So there is consideration of that. The real estate taxes, the property tax, our due date is June 5th. Providing a 30-day would bring us to July 5th. In order to close the fiscal year, we need to receive the taxes by end of August. It gives a 30-day leeway. Our main debt service payments are due on July 15th. So 30-day, as far as cash flow goes, could be handled, but larger than 30 days could be a cash flow issue for us.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's very telling. One of the questions that I had for Sally actually was, what are the business owners telling her or you guys what they need from us? And if it truly is a cash crunch, really the only two requests that I've gotten from significant businesses, aside from what you guys have discussed, are one, some type of grant or loan from the city. And I think that's been addressed. We're not really set up for that right now. And then the other is just pure cash flow, preservation of cash flow. So if there are things that we can defer, even if it's just for a short period of time, that legally we're allowed to, don't put us in serious cash and fiscal strain trying to balance our own checking, and can give them a little bit of lifeblood to try to make it through, at least until some of the federal money starts flowing. But that looks, based on the businesses that I've talked to around town, and folks even at the federal level, there's no telling when that money actually ends up in people's checking accounts. So there are other things that we can do, even if it's small, just to give them a bit of breathing room. I think we should explore that, but only what's feasible.
Well, and could I just throw out that, rent is a huge expense for these folks. Rent and payroll are the two biggest expenses, right? There are two landlords I'd like to mention who are really kind of going above and beyond. Lincoln at Tinner Hill has been terrific about deferring rent, not just for the next month or two, but they'll figure it out by the end of the lease term. And also Bob Young has actually hired somebody to work with his tenants to secure the PPP loan. And that's huge and tremendous. Anything we can do to encourage that kind of behavior by the landlords would be immensely helpful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Sally. I think especially for some of the larger projects where they've got the apartment buildings, the multifamily is there to help take the pressure off on the commercial side, gives us a little bit more breathing room. And even if we don't have a specific policy in place, some other jurisdictions and other property owners have been pushing jurisdictions to allow for a property tax deferral if they'll offer a deferral, an in-kind deferral and rent. Again, it depends on the location. However, it may just take us reaching out to landlords and asking them if they have the ability to do that. Sometimes it just helps to ask. But that's great that we've got a couple folks that are doing that. And I'm sure that we're getting information out to businesses and landlords about banks that they can speak to and other folks in town that may be able to help them navigate some of the applications. So the last question I had was about funding for traffic calming. Phil had asked a number of good questions on that. Some of the other projects that we have where I think funding was already intact and accounted for, or we were expecting it from a regional or state body, such as the Greenway Downs project and some of the missing sidewalk projects. Will those be able to continue, Cindy, or do you think that funding is at risk for those as well?
So far in our communication with VDOT, those existing grants haven't been put at risk because they were already appropriated, but everybody's re-looking at future grant awards, whether it's at the state level as well as MVTA and MVTC, because a lot of our grants, like MVTA for 30%, are based on grantors or sales gas tax, which are all dropping. So future grants are being monitored and questionable. So far, we have not had any message from VDOT that existing grants, whether they're passed through federal or state, are at risk, but we're closely monitoring.
Okay. And then last question, just to get clarification, because I've had two folks in the community ask me about this. Our policy on our parks at this particular time is, one, the parks are open to walk through, run through, exercise in, as long as people are practicing proper social distancing. There are no public gatherings, and any of the park amenities themselves are off limits. But walking through and traveling through the parks, those are not off limits. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Just want to clarify that on the record. All right. Thank you. That's it. Thanks, Mayor Tarter.
Maybe with one additional point, because some people might think of them the same way. School properties are generally closed.
Yes. Yeah, I should have clarified that. Yes. School properties are closed. This is just for the city owned.
That's right.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Snyder.
Yes. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Wyatt, Cindy, Celeste, everyone we've heard from tonight and all of our city employees for having to adjust very rapidly to very difficult circumstances. A few of us have been through some pretty bad times in the past, but this one presents entirely new challenges. It seems to me that our number one obligation is to maintain the city's financial solvency and to provide for core services. And hopefully we'll be able to continue to do that. But I do think that folks' expectations for the coming budget year in particular need to be restrained. So I want to start with the issue of healthcare, because that's, after all, the thing that's driving all this. Are we seeing a lack of information, a lack of healthcare-related resources, a lack of testing, whatever, that the city can play some role in? Perhaps a communications role. I get a feed from Inova Hospital, for example. I'm sure the Virginia Hospital Center is sending out things. Is there one place where we're saying to our citizens, if you haven't, now I know that we're part of the Fairfax Health area, but is there one place where they can go to get information about the availability of healthcare resources to them in their circumstances if you're a city resident? That's probably a human services question, but I want to start with the health issue because that's, after all, this is what's driving everything. Wyatt, any comments from that, or Cindy on that?
Well, I'll say just a few words, and Cindy, please jump in if you've got some additional information. We are answering questions directly when we're contacted by our citizens and our residents. But generally the information we are sharing is that coming from the Fairfax County Health Department. And testing is a major concern. It has been throughout this crisis, and it remains so. Generally, the experience that I'm aware of has been 5 or more days to get test results back. And that's really tough on everybody. But it's also tough on particularly, our healthcare workers, which the city does not directly employ, but our first responders, which the city does directly employ. And we have had some of our police officers be in contact with people who are presumed positive, and they've needed self-quarantine because they simply didn't know because of the absence of a test. And so that's impacting our staff readiness. So that's a big problem, and we don't have any news from the health authorities that's going to change in the near term. It's a nationwide problem, and we're experiencing it here. Generally, I think what the health department is advising people is to contact their own doctor, and if they don't have their own doctor, then to contact a health professional through whichever way that they normally would, and get if they have a direct concern, to rely on their doctor to advise them on that. But there is good information out there about symptoms and about information that anybody, I think, can read and understand and recognize their own symptoms. So that's a brief answer. Cindy, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I would like to highlight, in terms of the point of where's the one good place to go, the city's website has stood up a COVID-19 page that has things like how to help with volunteers and so forth, but it includes the right place to go, and we do encourage and link right back to the health department because they're keeping their information good, they're trusted, it's consolidated. And then we're using that information also in the daily report that Ms. Hardy mentioned earlier. And so we're encouraging people to sign up. Instead of getting eFocus right now, you get the daily report. And we're always trying to have an update on alerts, some key information, and then add other things in to be more than just health oriented. So I think And the health department website will do exactly what Mr. Shields was talking about. What should you do if, and gives you some scenarios. I also want to message, we still have active the public information line that we stand up in an emergency, and that is being still staffed, even if it's not physically in a city facility. We're rotating staff remotely. 703-248-5200, also on the website, where if somebody just doesn't know where to go, they can call in and we'll help to connect them, whether it's COVID-19 related or trash pickup or how to do an online storytelling at the library.
So thanks for that. I guess my question went to actually the kind of thing that Wyatt mentioned a minute ago. Are we seeing gaps in the healthcare resources or system that would affect our citizens that we should bring to the attention of the state or the feds or whoever? And I think Wyatt gave an example of that a minute ago. I'm not going to, here's personal health advice. There are lots of places for that, but we are in, we're blessed in being in an area with significant resources, hospitals, doctors, clinics, and whatever. But there's probably different accessibility depending on socioeconomic status. And I guess my question is, do we have anything out there that would help us monitor resources and gaps that we can bring to the attention of others? And what I'm hearing is there's an individual line, perhaps from that we can gather information. But Wyatt, the kind of thing that you mentioned about the testing of our first responders, that's clearly something that we need to bring to the attention of others, as well as doing everything we can directly. So my question really goes to resources, systems, and are we seeing some gaps out there that we need to bring to others' attention?
Let me respond just by saying we are participating regionally, whether it's the work that you're doing or the work that Mayor Tarter is doing as the chair of the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, where these issues are discussed regularly and how we communicate those to the governor and to the federal government. And so that gets to issues like getting supplies, masks, gloves, PPEs, but it also gets to some of the big institutional issues, such as the Regional Hospital Association is tracking every day and sending us all a report every day in terms of their available beds, their available ICU beds, their operating status. Currently in our region, they have the capacity to meet the healthcare demands. But when you look at the projections and kind of that, we're still on the upward curve. We're working regionally to plan for when the need might outstrip the beds. And I think that, and you hear this nationally, and it's very true here, that beds are one thing. In fact, beds are probably the easiest part of the equation. The real challenge will be providing staffing for those beds. And in that, I think, while there is discussion of the state government helping to fund a surge hospital at the Dulles Expo area, I think the area healthcare providers, the hospitals, are very concerned about how that facility is going to be staffed. I don't think that's fully been resolved yet. So that's a little bit of information on that really critical area of concern.
And the one thing, Mr. Snyder, if I could just add to what Mr. Shields says, is to reinforce that we're actively engaged in those conversations, whether it's through the health department, the regional commission, or through VDEM, since we have our emergency manager that you all know now, Joe Carter, actively tracking that. And so we know what's happening. We're tracking the modeling, but also it'd be a way as we need to express our voice.
Right, and if we encounter, the staff, all of you encounter what looks like gaps or issues, make sure that we bring them to the attention of the mayor and his coordination and the others that are engaged regionally. So thanks for that. Point number 2, our ordinance, our longer ordinance that we voted on earlier this evening is revocable if circumstances change and we can get back to business. One of the interesting questions I have is, what are the metrics going to be to determine when businesses can reestablish themselves or where the city can assume a more normal operations? And how soon prudently and how will that decision be made? I would love nothing better than for these circumstances to turn around and us be able to achieve some degree of the old normal, if you will, but we have to only do that prudently. So how do you see the decision making going on that?
So we're trying to figure that out ourselves right now, and I think I think the governor's role in this should not be understated. I think that's probably where the direction is going to come from. We do have I mentioned it earlier, a long-range planning team that is tasked with thinking through those issues. Ideally, this would be something that would be predictable for the public, so it's not helter-skelter and, some people are opening, some aren't, there's confusion, maybe there's fairness issues. Hopefully it's done in a well-regulated and predictable way, and we're trying to get on top of that now so we can be helpful in communicating when we get to that point.
Thanks for that. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
That's all I had on that. It is, and we'll be thinking about that in terms of opening up City Hall facilities as well as for the business community. The schools are set, obviously, through this school year, so that decision's already been made. But we do know that in the first 4 weeks of this crisis, we were constantly struggling to kind of keep up and stay on top of the changing situation, and we really do want to get ahead of this so that it's more predictable to the best extent possible here in the city.
Thank you very much. Finally, I would at our next meeting, as other council members have suggested, receive from our business community those low cost or no cost things that we can do to make their life easier and at least help them deal with the circumstances to the extent that we can assist in that way. So thanks very much. And I really want to end where I began. I thanked all of you. But I also want to thank our citizens. There's been a fantastic degree of working hard to comply. Everybody's dealing with a rapidly moving situation, but our citizens have been just great. Our businesses have been fantastic, and thanks to all of our city staff and my colleagues on council. Thanks.
All right, so Mr. Lichtenhouse had one additional question. Why don't we go to Mr. Lichtenhouse and then on to Mr.
Yeah, just a quick question related to our capital projects. Have we started looking into our ability to project renegotiating some of the contracts that we have if we're able to achieve cheaper costs at this particular juncture?
Mr. Lichtenhouse, let me look into that and get back with you on that.
Okay. I think we should be looking at that across a range of capital projects throughout the city, whether it's parks and rec, streets, library, you name it. This is an opportunity for us to potentially get back some of the overruns that we've seen and some of the projects that we've been kicking off. Thank you.
Let's move to Mr. Z.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess you can all hear me at this point. It is getting late, so I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible. Many of us on council have spoken of the need to address the needs of citizens, our businesses, the things that we can do. I hear everyone loud and clear, and in my own daily contacts with those that provide services to me. So it's it's personal in that sense that I ask them, what is it that we can do for you? And of course, I just came. How do you get me some money? And I don't have a good response to that. I said, there's only so much that we can control. We defer, we forgive. We're nowhere close to those decisions yet. I think Mr. Snyder has it, hit the nail right on the head, which is that there's no end to this until we discover a vaccine that works. And that doesn't look like it's going to happen next 90 days. So we talk about deferral measured in periods of weeks or months. We're actually talking about the need for continuity of operations, the ability to create revenue and finance the basic services, arguably could be years. We know the rhythm for establishing a vaccine. In many ways, we're lucky that so far we've discovered that the two strains, the type S and the type L, with the type L actually coming as a mutation off the type S. My point here is that it's we have the information at this point to be able to predict how effective the vaccine would be, and so I do think it's going to be used, and I think we need to think carefully and seriously about spending the money that we're going to need downstream. Because if we spend it now, there will be no dry powder left for later. And that would be the greatest disservice to our city. That would cause that severe disruption that I would say would create an existential problem for the city. Existential. So we have to be very careful about what we do going forward. Granted, we don't know everything there is to know at this point. We have not overlaid the last recession's effect on this particular issue. We do know that the last recession took 274 days to get to bottom, and this happened in 54 days. So it's my point again is that this is unique. We don't know how to predict our way out of this one yet. Beyond that, I wait for additional data. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Dan. Letty had one more comment, and so we're going to turn it back over to Letty.
Great, thank you. I had asked this over email, but I don't remember whether the rest of council got this as well, and maybe it would be useful for the public because I've actually gotten asked this several times. Given that the federal funds rate is nearly at zero, what is the opportunity for us to refinance the really big debt we just issued 2 months ago? And I think the answer was pretty much no, but I think it's worth at least answering for the public and the rest of council.
So, Councilmember Hardy, the debt that was issued has a 7-year call period, and it can be called, the earliest it can be called is in 2026.
So we can't refinance it until 2026?
That's correct.
Is there anything else, any other debt we have on hand that would be worth looking into?
We are looking into it. However, we did look at it even when we issued in November. There isn't any quite yet. There is only one debt that is eligible for refinancing, and we're looking into it versus the cost that's involved if there are going to be significant savings there.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Mary Beth also has an additional comment.
Just one last question, that is, if someone is diagnosed with COVID-19, what's their responsibility to tell their neighbors or their friends? Does the Fairfax Health Department still do all that contact tracing? Or do people in the community have a responsibility to let other people know? Is there a protocol there?
Cindy, do you want to answer that question? This is an issue that came up just, in a couple of instances, and I know you addressed it in a couple of them.
Sure. The health department is generally not doing all the contact follow-up except in specialized cases just because of the breadth of our community cases. But in situations like hospitals, first responders, nursing homes, they're still doing the contact investigation. From a public standpoint, the health department is not reporting individual cases, and we are not either. And so we may not know as a community who was tested positive. It is one of our own staff. So I think it's very prudent for the community to pay close attention to what it takes to keep yourself and your family safe, the social distancing, no group gathering, the CDC's new messaging on cloth face coverings. And if there is a significant health hazard, though, the health department will reach out. It will be maintained confidential. They'll reach out to those individuals. There'll be no mass report for the community, nor will we. Of course, people have their own values, and hopefully they would share with those that they came in contact with and help prevent the spread. I think it was 2 days ago, we had a great graphic in the daily update that showed one dot going to 5 people, going to 15, 20, and 50, etc. And then if you stopped that contact, how it significantly reduced. So I think if we all take that to heart as our own self-responsibility and help share that with others. And of course, a lot of people see group gatherings and families can still be together. So if they're playing together on a volleyball, field, that's okay in their own home, but we want to not encourage that in our public. So a long answer, but there's not a lot where we're going to, as a city, message out individual cases of contacts. The health department will do it in a very specific high-risk area, but most cases, if it's not high risk, then the standard protocol, whether you know or not, is social distancing, no large gatherings, and wear the cloth masks.
Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions or comments from anyone on council? Celeste, were there any additional public comments that were made during the pendency of this hearing?
No, sir.
Okay. So I know there's been some problems with my audio link, and so I'm just going to keep my comments brief and just reiterate my thanks to everyone on council and city staff, but particularly our community. I think it seems to me from my own observations that compliance with the guidelines and mandates is high, and I think that's very good news. And I think we're making the right steps as a government. And so, let's just keep working together and move forward. So is there anything else anyone wants to say before we end this hearing tonight? I know we don't have a schedule for coming hearings. Excuse me? I would anticipate that we'd be getting together in a similar fashion either next week or the following week. And I guess I would look to the city manager as to when city manager might think there'd be additional materials and information for us to reconvene. But I do think we ought to continue to have regular meetings in this fashion. And so I might just look to the city manager either now or over the coming days as to guidance as to when we should next meet. But I would think in the next, either next week or the following week.
Mayor, if I could, I would recommend that we meet on Monday next week. And in Ms. Bawa's presentation, she did note what the region is doing in terms of some of the relief measures, in terms of deferral of taxes. And I think that is a discussion that is time sensitive. and we could have options for the city council to consider on those and action on those. I think it is something, to the extent possible, that the region can act in similar fashion on those deferrals. Many of our businesses have businesses across jurisdictions, and if the rules are the same, I think that's just generally helpful. And so I think it's been worthwhile to take time to see what the larger jurisdictions are doing, and that has come into focus now. And I think we could provide recommendations to the council for its consideration and action within a week.
All right, that sounds good. Why don't we make that a plan and meet virtually as we're doing tonight next Monday.
Mr. Mayor, Dave Snyder, let me ask Wyatt this. It seems to me that the larger jurisdictions may be funded differently. They have different resources than we have. So I would caution that it is important to know what the other jurisdictions are doing. It's also important to know what the federal government has done or will do, and Cindy will be following that. I would also expect the state needs to step up here. So I'm hoping that we're going to keep the ultimate solvency of the city very much in our minds as well, and not automatically follow what other jurisdictions are doing just because they're doing it. In other words, there may be other things we can do that are more ambitious or maybe need to be less ambitious.
So at the minimum, can we talk about those zoning ideas if they do require action from council? Can we do that Monday, since those ones seem fairly low cost?
Yes.
And then if we can, before Monday, have some input from the business community on what else they'd like to see, that would be most helpful. And then for the ones that might cost us some money in terms of cash flow, be able to quantify that so people can get comfortable with the idea.
Yes.
Great.
All right, anything else from anyone? That's the next Monday's meeting.
Mayor, I move to adjourn.
All right, that sounds like a plan. Anyone else have anything before we adjourn? All right, we are adjourned. Let's do it. Thank you all.